There is entwinement. These 64 metronomes begin in discord. Slowly they become entangled. As we watch, we will start to see that they're vibrating in many different directions, but then slowly, they start to share. They start to become entangled, entwined, and they start to come together. Now, yes, they're in the same room, on the same platform, so there is a connection. But what we're going to find now, through quantum theory, there is a type of entanglement, a type of entwinement that is happening through the universe at vast distances and in vast quantities beyond time, beyond space. Science is now embracing this entwinement, this entanglement. And what we're going to be doing is talking about bringing this entwinement into medicine. What I have done is bring this entwinement into medicine. The work that I started back in 1974. Let's discuss this and understand more about entwinement.
Albert Einstein was, there's no other word for it, a genius. When it came to the idea that two particles can be entangled and an effect on one could be instantaneously felt by the other, even over vast distances, well, for Einstein, that was simply unbelievable. He dubbed it spooky action at a distance.
If we take twin photons and separate them at great vast lengths, vast lengths, we will find that if we detect one, the other changes to respond. There maintains an entanglement, an entwinement.
Entanglement has been demonstrated time and again, and now, for the first time ever, we've taken a picture of it. To achieve this, researchers from the University of Glasgow shot an ultraviolet laser at a crystal, which broke apart some of the photons from the beam, creating two entangled photons.
These entangled photons separated, and then they were able to take a picture at exactly the same time of the entangled photons to further prove entwinement.
Entangled photons were created, they were split and sent on different paths. Down one path, the scientists set up a filter that would limit the photon to one of 4 different phases. Passing through this filter is effectively the same as observing the photon's phase. So as soon as its phase was determined, its entangled partner traveling down the other path would take on the opposite.
And lo and behold, further proof of extensive evidence for entwinement.
Finally, when the two entangled photons in opposite phases were simultaneously detected, a super-sensitive camera capable of detecting individual photons would take a picture.
And here we have that picture. And now we can see, for the first time, absolute proof of entwinement, entanglement. But just what is the nature of this, and how far does it progress? Is it just with photons, or is it more? Because I was able to show that, through the work of Dr. Isaacs, that even biological systems can have entwinement. But let's learn more about entwinement.
Two particles interact briefly, they influence each other so that their properties are somehow connected, and yet we refrain from measuring these properties to preserve quantum uncertainty. Quantum mechanics requires that we describe the particle pair with a single combined wave function that encompasses all possible states for both particles.
Over just the last couple of years, science has now universally accepted quantum entanglement and entwinement. It now has become part of everyday scientific belief, and this has changed the world of science.
The wave function describing this superposition is a complete description of reality, and our experience of a well-defined material universe only has meaning at the moment of measurement. This peekaboo universe is the heart of Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation.
It would be like having two particles, each hidden under a cup. Looking at one mysteriously causes the other to reveal itself too, with matching properties.
Niels Bohr insisted that it was meaningless to assign reality to the universe in the absence of observation. in the intervals between measurement, quantum systems truly exist as a fuzzy mixture of all possible properties, what we call a superposition of states.
Photons. The equations imply that a source of photons could create pairs in such a way that when we measure one, causing it to snap out of its fuzzy state, the other mysteriously snaps out of its fuzzy state at the same instant, with correlated properties.
We call such particles an entangled pair. Now, according to the Copenhagen interpretation, any measurement of one particle automatically collapses the entire entangled wave function, and so affects the results of measurements of the other particle.
Now, this created problems for Einstein and others because this seemed to be a transmission of energy. That's a wrong thought, but actually it seemed to be a transmission of energy, and how could something happen faster than the speed of light? How could it happen instantaneously?
When spontaneously created from a photon, these particles will always be spinning in opposite directions to each other. However, until measured, we can't know which direction either is spinning. We just know that they're opposite each other. Their wave functions are therefore entangled.
These entangled photons might seem as separate objects, but in the world of physics, at one set of dimensions, we could look at them as sharing the same space. So thereby, instantaneous is to be expected.
Measurement of the spin of one of these particles tells us the spin of the other, no matter how large the distance between them. But in quantum mechanics, measurement actually affects the thing you're measuring. That's an influence that could, theoretically, be transmitted instantly across any distance, and even back in time, violating locality and possibly violating causality.
Well, we definitely have a non-local universe, and we basically have a appearance of a causal universe in 11 dimensions. And scientists have said that there's 11 dimensions that they found. And basically, this gives them the idea of different types of folds in the space. Now, I made the calculation to find out that there's a 12th dimension. This 12th dimension would tie in all the other 11 and bring them together. And this 12th dimension that pervades all of them, this is what I was able to call the subspace. You've seen this in Star Trek, talking about subspace. In this 12th dimension area, basically, there is one-dimensional area, this 12th dimension, this subspace, where everything is still one. You see everything separate in the planet Earth, but if you took a picture from the planet Earth from another solar system, it's one, all one. But at one level, the entire universe, mathematically, can still be considered one thing. We call that subspace.
But where are you in the universe? Or here's a better question. Where is the center of the universe? Well, this might sound crazy, but it's everywhere. This is known as the cosmological principle. No matter where you are in the universe, everything else will seem to be moving away from you, expanding at the same rate. The universe is expanding, but not like a balloon getting bigger with all the people inside it. Instead, it's as if we are the surface of a balloon. If you were to put a bunch of dots on a balloon and then blow it up, all of the dots would move away from each other at the same rate. And on the surface of the balloon, there is no center. Take a look at these two layers. They are exactly similar, except the top layer represents a 5% expansion of the bottom layer. Let's say that you live on one of these dots, and you want to measure where everything's moving away from. Well, watch what happens when I line up a dot in the past and the present. Boom. It looks like the center of the expansion. I can do this with any dot. As soon as I choose a dot to be the frame of reference, it immediately becomes the center of the expansion. When you look up into the sky, think instead about this. No matter where you are or who you are or what your friends or your parents tell you, you really scientifically are the center of the universe.
In an infinite universe without measure, it would be as if we were all one point without measure. At one level of thought, things are all one, all is entwined. all was entangled. Now let's get back into understanding biology.
In his 1944 book, What is Life?, the quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger suggested that, quote, incredibly small groups of atoms, much too small to display exact statistical laws, do play a dominating role in the very orderly and lawful events within a living organism.
Schrödinger also said that there was a life force, a negative entropy, a life force working against entropy that maintained our health. And this was a nutrient that we needed to eat. But we need to understand a little bit more. And working with Dr. Isaacs, I came up with the idea of complementarity, how biology is a quantum event. My dear friend and mentor, James Pershing Isaacs, wrote the book Complementarity in Biology way back in the 50s. Now, I reinterpreted the book as a Prometheus so he could really understand. I tried to make it a little more simpler, fill it out. But Dr. Isaacs proposed that we have quantum events in the subatomic, very, very small. But if in certain places, like in biology, if there's enough of those events, and it can produce a similar type of indeterminacy, then this indeterminacy, these biological events, would also be quantic. Working with him and advising him was the great Werner Heisenberg. This is the guy who won the Nobel Prize in 1932, and he actually helped work on the ideas of the complementarity. And he proposed this incredible formula that allows us to understand what is quantic, what is thermodynamic. And when we apply this to the synaptic cleft, oh my God, the synaptic cleft is quantic. It is not Newtonian in nature. So thereby, we have to change our ideas of medicine. This is what the Prometheus is all about. So read the Prometheus and watch. Because we're able to prove that the synaptic cleft is a quantic process. So then thinking is a quantic process, not thermodynamic. An example, if we were to take an inanimate thermodynamic object like a ball and throw it, if we have exact knowledge of how we throw it, the direction, the force, etc., and if we send this out, we'll be able to very easily calculate where it lands within some degree of accuracy. But now what if we take a quantic event, something living, a living system? Let's throw a chicken. Now if we throw the chicken, we're going to find out we've dramatically increased the indeterminacy, the uncertainty. And Heisenberg told us that the first gulp of the natural sciences will turn you to an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. Another great in quantum physics, Erwin Schrödinger, he wrote about life, and he found that there was a negative entropy, a life force, an order, an organization, information, complexity, something that maintained the reproduction and the metabolism in an orderly fashion. He called it negative entropy, a life force. And he said that this is a nutrient. In other words, when we eat the plants and the animals, we want the nutrient of neg entropy, the life force. It's not in the synthetics. This negative entropy is the force that fights against decay and death and entropy. It is needed, and we need this. It's a vital nutrient for our lives. And then the body is made of atoms. Around the outside of the atoms are electrons. The electrons don't touch, so the atoms don't touch. What does touch is photons. And at the cellular level, every cell, every part of the cell, is responding to electromagnetic radiation. We've done the movies on this to help prove this. You should take a look at that work because it is quite extensive, and I cannot afford to review it now. But what we can see is that undeniably, biology, thereby medicine, is quantic. We need to now deal with a different set of rules. So studies have shown that large objects, even humans, even living systems, large objects can have entanglement, and entanglement is not destroyed. Studies have shown us this as well. And basically, we know that quantum physics, there's an indeterminacy, there's an observer effect, there's an entwinement. And now what we've been able to show, that the biology is quantic because of its light force neg entropy, and how the synaptic cleft falls under the Heisenberg formula. Now the quantic systems will express themselves with indeterminacy, uncertainty, entwinement of particles or systems, once joined, will maintain a level of communication, and the consciousness of an observer can affect the particle or system. And this is what we've been able to show and prove in all the different research of quantum entwinement as a principle of human communication and biology, because this is what James Pershing Isaacs wrote in his original book. One primary example of quantum biology is the ability of the homing pigeon to see magnetic force lines. This can now be explained with quantum biology.
Birds have some protein in their eyes. When light hits the protein, it knocks an electron off an attached molecule that goes on to an adjacent molecule. The two molecules now share a pair of entangled electrons. They become a radical pair for a short period of time. Then they quickly react to produce some chemical byproducts. But
Schrödinger was able to point out that life could only be understood in its quantic, not its thermodynamic properties, that life would obey quantum principles.
byproducts are sensitive to the spin state of the valence electrons at the time of the reaction. So, during the short lifespan of the radical pair, this valence spin state can be modified if the bird changes the orientation of its head relative to the Earth's magnetic field. That leads to a changing yield of different possible byproducts across the bird's eyes. That could lead to a true visual sense of magnetic field orientation.
We successfully made the treatise that all of life and all life processes are photonic, dependent on light. I point you out, you need to look at our work on this to understand it more.
So, Erwin Schrödinger's ideas about quantum mechanics influence living organisms may be right, and quantum magnetoreception in birds isn't the only possible example of what we call quantum biology. We know for sure that it happens in some cases, like the quantum tunneling that drives enzyme catalysis.
Since the electrons don't touch, what actually touches the chemicals are the photons, then we have to understand that all processes are photonic.
That long-range quantum coherence may drive photosynthesis, and there are some highly contentious ideas like quantum entanglement in the brain's microtubule proteins as a key ingredient of human consciousness.
But in our book in the Promorpheus, we've been able to show that life is a quantic thing, and that the basic communication of DNA inside cells happens through a type of radiation. It's very, very complicated, and you need to really understand this by watching the movies that we've had on this life, photonic life, and to understand it a lot more, to look at the different texts that are here inside the description below from YouTube, and then you could start to understand more. And I presented this material all over the world, even presented it at the Nobel Prize Hospital in Stockholm, Sweden, and it just hasn't really broke into the mainstream yet, because the chemical companies don't really like this. But let me outline some of the original research that we started in 1974 about brainwave.
You see this? This is a machine we can use together. It can put us in a deep state of hypnosis, and you'd be very relaxed and very comfortable. And then we could look at those bad dreams together and understand them.
At Youngstown State University, back in 1974, working in the postgraduate department, we did studies on the brainwave and the body electric communicating. We started to do some ESP research. Now here's an excerpt from a 1977 movie that shows us research that was going on back then in brainwave and in communication between subjects. But there was no way to explain it, so this research wasn't really accepted. Now quantum entwinement has been universally accepted, as that scientists everywhere have now recognized that two things once joined can maintain a level of communication. This type of entwinement, now this starts to give us some understanding. Well, way back then, 1974, we did the research on evoked potential brainwave. at Youngstown State University, we could show a transfer of information from one person to another, meaningful others. But this communication was never verbally recognized, was only recognized unconsciously by the body electric. But the research has been duplicated by many people. Here, Wolfgang Ambach has done the research and done exactly the same type of study we did, verifying, validating. Now, what we did in this research was to put one person into a brainwave device measuring the brainwave, the ECG, and skin resistance. We measured their body electric, and they were put into a private room. They were told that their person, their partner, was someplace else and would be subjected to a bright light and a harsh sound. Here's the publication of it when we reproduced this study in 2014. Now, the person who was waiting, the person who was hooked up, they were waiting for some type of communication. They were told to make verbal guesses, but their verbal guesses were terribly wrong. But their body electric had a response, you see, because there really was a telepathy between the couples. This research has been duplicated by many people, and it's been shown to be real. Couples can communicate, but not verbally. Now, the person was sitting in a dark room, the other person now was sitting in a dark room, and they were going to be shown a bright stroboscope and a harsh sound that at random times, and this would provoke a type of brainwave. This would provoke a response inside their brain, and the other person would detect it with their body electric. Morphic resonance could explain this, the work of Rupert Sheldrake, primary perception, but all of this stuff was kind of poo-pooed and not really allowed to be explored. But see, here the person could detect when the other person was in trouble, when they actually had something that they were in trouble. Now, here in the movie, they show that there's trouble because of the spirits, etc. Now, that was the movie. But back in our research showed that there undeniably was an ability of the body electric to detect this type of reaction in the meaningful other, whether it was father, son, mother, daughter, siblings, brothers, meaningful others. You see, because now, today, science has accepted this idea of quantum entwinement entanglement. We've reproduced this work over and over again with independent researchers. Now, the world of science has changed forever. So just to repeat for clarity, one of the entwined subjects was hooked to a polygraph, measuring the body electric. They were kept in a separate building, apart from the other, because in another building, in a dark room, was their partner, the meaningful other, with a strobe light, would go off at random times and shock them, giving them an EEG electropotential. In the multiple entwinement communication studies, repeatedly, verbal guesses of the EEG subject were very wrong. There was no ability of them to connect verbally to their person at a distance. But there was a measurable electrophysiological reaction of the body electric to the other's fear or startle. The nonverbal quantic mind is entwined with the relatives of meaningful others. And this is a skill that can be improved with practice. And this will be the basis for our subspace therapy and our telemedicine of the EPFX in the future. So now we can see from our research of the ability of the body electric, non-verbally, to be able to have a communication. And the studies have been reproduced by many independent researchers. So now we can see that there truly is this type of entwinement, this type of thing happening inside quantum physics, where quantum physics is now taking a bigger and bigger hold of our lives and showing that entanglement is not destroyed, and that it can affect large objects, and that there is indeed a principle of synchronicity, an underlying order of the universe, and that there is evidence of prayer works. Now we can understand prayer better through entwinement. We're all one with the universe. We are all connected. And now, since we are one, and since you are me and we are all one, Let's make a new medicine based on quantum entwinement, a new medicine that will help us to deal with people